Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm here this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I know some of the people here. I'm the Vice President of Healthcare Strategy for Accruent, software company, number of CMMSs. But I spent the majority of my career working in the industry, worked with some of you in my past lives. Ran a very successful in-house program for a large 50-hospital IDN in the Midwest. We did literally all the circuits in-house, except for 3 modalities. We didn't do the CyberKnife, the Gamma Knife, because they were very specialized, one-of-a-kind devices that you could maintain a high level of competency on. And we didn't do the surgical robots, because we all know how accommodating intuitive surgical is, training and offering parts. So we didn't do those. We did everything else and came in at a cost of service ratio around 4%. So I feel that that was pretty successful at their customer satisfaction surveys. And so after I left there, I worked at another IDN running capital supply chain. So I had the folks that did all of the contracting for capital purchases. We did the contracting for services and had an equipment disposition program, and then I also had responsibility for clinical engineering there. So bring a little bit of background into this role here and helping my company and our customers succeed. And most of the stuff that I talk with them about has nothing to do with software. It has everything to do with process and process improvement. And what we're going to talk about today has a lot to do with that. Dave, do a little intro.
Sure. I'm Dave Scott. I work as a senior technician at UCHealth in Aurora, Colorado. I've been in biomed a long time. Some of you might know me from the Colorado Biomed Association. I ran a certification group there for several years for CBET certification, and I've held the office of president, vice president, board member of the association. I've worked a little bit in management, not as much as Al. My focus is more like technician related now, because I want to see techs be as good as they can be. So Al and I kind of teamed up on this, and my part is kind of the tech part, and Al's part is kind of the management part. So we thought we could kind of put this together into one thing, like what we thought was very important in this presentation. So welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
So it was working a minute ago.
Was it?
Is the power?
No, it is on. Oh, great.
Old school.
I tested it before she came out.
I had to do this in my other presentation. I had to
Stop it. Start it. Okay. There we go. So our agenda for today, I'll cover some of the why it's so critically important for the success of your program, how it can play into staffing and justifying staffing, justifying the ability to get additional staffing when you need it. If you attended my session yesterday, capital planning, you'll understand how the data you collect on work orders plays a huge role in capital planning initiatives. Benchmarking, I'll talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that are underway to help us move closer to being able to do benchmarking in our industry as a whole. But even back when I was doing this work in a hospital, I didn't really put a lot of stock in the benchmarking tools that were available, so I focused more on internal benchmarking. I can't tell you how important that is as well. And yeah, so I'll go into that a little bit more. An improved and more efficient operation, how I can play into making your technicians more efficient and more productive in a good way. And then we'll talk about how we do that through data integrity and data standardization. And then at the end, I'll cover some potential results that can come out of this. So let's start with the staffing. So I'll show you a report that I used to take to finance every year at budget time. And what it entailed was, it's so funny the way finance things, isn't it? That the assumption is that for every new piece of equipment that I buy, I retire the same number of devices. It never happens. Never.
No one ever wants to get rid of stuff.
Well,
They just want to add.
Over the course of my leadership, I averaged 10% increase in income year over year. So it doesn't stay static. It's like, look, if you want my budget to stay flat, if you want my staff to stay flat, stop buying stuff, right? Because otherwise, that's not feasible.
Do they
Or
expect
reasonable.
the number of patients to increase every year that they see?
Yeah. So I'll show you exactly how the data that we collected through work orders played into justifying staff, and I'll run through that report in detail. But I mentioned it in the session that I did yesterday as well. When I talk about data integrity, it involves a number of things. When you mention data integrity, most people think it's things like the manufacturer model device category, having all of that information standardized and clean. Well, that's part of it. But part of it is also consistent documentation by your techs. You have to make sure that all the time you spend working on stuff is captured, all of the parts that you replace and the associated costs are captured in the work order. Because without that, you can't do any of these other things, right? And I know it sounds harsh, but I had some very crucial conversations with staff where they said, well, things like, what do you want me to do? Take care of my customers or do my paperwork? It's like, I do both.
Heard that one before.
That's not an argument. I mean, look, I said, do what I'm asking you to do, and I'll show you the results of what that can do for us as an organization. I never met any biomed leader who was successful going to finance and saying, I need some more people because, my people are really, really busy. That just doesn't cut it, right? So you have to have data to support your requests. And like I said, I'll show you how I went about doing that, and was very, very successful. I never got turned down for additional staff, okay? And it's interesting, after the session yesterday, I talked to the gentleman who said that, you know what, I've done what you showed, and they still won't give me people. They're just adamantly opposed to having staff. And I said, even if that's true, what it does is it protects you against just dumping additional bricks on the load for all of your team and expecting them to work more and more and more and harder and harder and harder, because eventually, you break their backs, and that's just not reasonable. So even if that's true, at least now you justify the additional cost of outsourcing that work, right? Okay. And again, improved and more efficient operations. Let me talk about the capital planning and benchmarking first. And I did the session on capital planning yesterday. Some of the components that play into that are the cost of repairing something versus replacing, right? And if you don't have all of that data in there, you lose that ability, right? So that's key. Benchmarking. I found over the years, a lot of technicians are afraid of benchmarking, and maybe it's where they worked before that it was used as a tool to beat them up. Okay, look, it says that you're supposed to get this done in a certain amount of time, and you're taking more time. Work harder, do this faster. And I never looked at it this way. In my mind, data was nothing more than an indicator, right? If it's outside the standard deviation from the mean, it gave me reason to peel the onion and try to understand why. So let's say, for instance, that my PM procedure says it's supposed to take half an hour to PM, and this guy's taking 30% more time to get it done. What does that mean? Does that mean that he's slow? Does that mean that he's screwing around? Maybe, but could mean a couple things. Maybe he needs more training. Maybe it's that over the course of his time working in the field, this guy learned that if he adds these additional steps to the PM, it'll reduce the CM. And if that's true, don't I want everybody doing that? Similarly, if you've got somebody whose PM times are 30% less than the mean, does it mean that he's skipping steps, not doing what he's supposed to do? Maybe, but it could mean, once again, that over time, he's learned some tricks to accomplish the same thing in a shorter period of time. And if that's true, don't I want everybody doing that, right? And so then it plays into the improved and more efficient operations, right? Those are the kinds of things that you do when you have the data to bring that to the forefront. You can get better year over year, and you do what's in the best interest of your technicians, you do what's in the best interest of your customers.
You can have a stripped screw when the device is 5 years old, and that could take 20 minutes to get the screw out.
Well, that's a great point. So I used to benchmark site by site, right? And so the time that it would take to maintain a group of devices at one site was higher than it took at another site. Once again, why is that? Does the technician that's over there need additional training? Or to your point, is that inventory, 30% older than the rest, and we need to look at replacing it? So, but the data will tell you that, right? You have to have the data. So I always look at data and documentation as a treasure. Okay, if you have it, it can lead you to treasure, like doing these innovative things for your organization, improving your work processes and workflows, and getting the additional staffing, all the things that I talked about with benefits, right? But you have to have the data. So David?
Thanks, Al. Before I get started, how many people in here work in management? How many people are technicians? Oh, all right. So I was talking to Bob this morning. Bob's from Colorado also. I'm from Colorado. We had our last Biomed Association meeting, and it was called MRI 101. And I told Bob, I don't think I even qualified to take the 101 class, because the guy that started talking, he said, how many people in here are MRI engineers? And none of us raised our hands. And he went on to do this presentation, and he started talking about, and his very first thing, he was talking about cold heads, and up goes my hand. Sorry, I'm kind of stupid, but I don't even know what a cold head is. Can you explain that? And even his explanation kind of went over my head. Okay, I'm done asking questions. But I thought he didn't really know his audience that well, so that's why I kind of asked, like, who does this, so I know kind of who I'm speaking to. But I think that's, if you ever get in this situation like Al and I are presenting, it's important to know your audience. And I know that we kind of have a mix at MD Expo, so it's kind of nice to know who we're talking to. So I already introduced myself. Work orderology. What is that? It's a made-up word. I made it up. I'll take credit for it. So ology, the definition of ology is a subject of study or a branch of knowledge. So we're going to study work orders. We're going to see from just the everyday work order to what it adds up in a bigger picture. So I think that a lot of times whenever us as technicians, especially as new technicians, or maybe even technicians that have been there a while, maybe we've been through some management changes, whatever, like we don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. We kind of go, well, why do we got to do all this tedious, like everyday work order stuff? And what does it mean? Why are we doing all this? So that's kind of what, if we get anything out of this presentation, that's what Al and I, what our goal was for this presentation, is to know from small pieces add up to big pieces. So types of work orders, repair or on demand, some CML called it, corrective maintenance, PM or maintenance work orders, training work orders. Do you do a training work order when you do training? Like for coming here to the MD Expo, it's a weekday. What is today, Tuesday? You're doing a work order that says, attended MD Expo, administrative time maybe, or training time. I would encourage, that's probably something you should do, right? I mean, Al talks about equipment time and non-equipment time, so I'll save that for him. Customer service or rounds, like talking to customers, going through the department, just something that hopefully you do every day or maybe every other day or something like that. Just talking with your customers, seeing what you can help them with, seeing how things are going, maybe asking them, hey, we're looking for, I went to a presentation earlier, we're looking for the orange 2021 stickers. Can you, if you have any pumps that have that sticker, can you try to save them aside for us? That's what that is. And then meetings, like environment of care meeting or your shop meeting or your huddle or your whatever it is that you have. I'm sure everybody attends meetings as a technician. It seems like that's like something you don't want to attend any more than you have to. Like, why am I attending meetings? I have work to do, Everybody's heard that before, I'm sure. But that's something you need to document that makes up your day. Whatever makes up your day is what goes in work orders. Work orders contain work done, parts used, time to complete each task. And each task could be attend MD Expo, 8 hours. That could be a task that you're doing in your work order for training. Whoops. So what kind of work should have work orders? Anything you do that you work on, even the smallest things. Example, patient monitor in a room needing alarms adjusted. This is not my example. This came from Dave Francoeur, people that know him, but he was talking about this one time at I think it was our symposium in Colorado. But he said, like if you're walking by a patient room and you see the nurse in there, like messing with the alarms and you hear all the alarms going off and, it seems like she's struggling. You go in there and ask, hey, I'm Dave from Biomedical. Can I help you with the monitor? It seems like maybe you're having some issues. And you go there and you help her set her or him, help them set the alarm limit or whatever it is, like the high alarm or the low alarm or whatever on ECG or pulse ox or whatever the case may be. Do you do a work order for that? No? Yeah, I see people like both.
Oh, why that's important is to identify trends, right? So you think, well, it's taking more time to document this than it took me to fix it. But let's say 2 days later, another nurse runs into the same issue. And 2 days later, another nurse runs into the same issue. Now you've identified a trend and you know that you need to go deeper with this and go into that department and so training, right?
In Dave's example, he said there was a visitor in the room. The visitor was the patient's daughter. The patient's daughter is a lawyer. That patient ended up passing away an hour or so later after you were in the room. They were probably going to die anyway. But they said, who was the guy that came in here and did the whatever to the monitor, and then my mom died after that? Do you have any documentation to see what you did? At that point, are you liable as a biomedical technician? I would say maybe, like you were just adjusting alarms. I'm sure that, like the patient was probably going to die anyway, but you could be held, you could be brought in for questioning at the minimum. So it's important to document what you're doing. And also, like Al said, it shows trends. It shows what's going on in your hospital. And if it's not written down, it's not done, right? Yeah.
I was on jury once for a malpractice case against the dentist.
Oh, wow.
And the hygienist was asked by the lawyer, do you remember my client 3 years ago on the 18th or whatever? And she went to pick up the check and said, I object, Your Honor. I asked her to be called from memory. You know what the judge said? That is from memory. From that day, we document everything on
From during jury duty. I've been to jury duty a few times and I've always never made it even to the questioning part, but one of these days I'll get it fixed, I hope. And maybe I'll learn something like you did in jury duty. So yeah, that's the example. And I think of that example that Dave gave and I thought, man, that's really important, to do the smallest things like that. It seems very minor, but it actually could end up being a lot bigger than what you thought it might have been. So I don't know if you guys can see this from the back, but Work order tasks. There's a lot of different tasks you do on work orders. Time to complete each task. Pick up from the customer or department. That's time that you put in your work order. I think, I see you taking pictures. I think this is going to be available through
It will be.
MD. Yeah, I think so. You can get the whole presentation from MD Publishing after the show here. But if you want to take pictures, that's cool. So work order, open work order, how long it takes you to open a work order. I mean, like, you don't think about that, but that's admin time. And some people, you know, take a little longer to open a work order. That's time that you're working in your CMMS. So I always try not to have acronyms. So CMMS, I have it in here, computerized maintenance management system. It's just your way of documenting your database, for lack of a better term. Problem solve, troubleshoot. What did you do to try to fix this piece of equipment? Did you have to return it for send it for a vendor to repair it? Maybe you ordered parts. Maybe you have to research parts to see what part to order. Maybe you have to call tech support. We know calling tech support, that's always really fast, right? You have that elevator music on there and you're about ready to kill yourself, and then they say, oh, we're ready to help, you know, this is whoever, we're ready to help you. Oh, let me transfer you to the next person. Oh, back on the whole music again, you know. So that takes time. That's time that you put in your work order. Parts installing the parts, that seems pretty obvious. If you receive it back from repair, maybe you have to do calibration, configuration. Maybe this morning we were talking about maybe you have to wipe the data from it and then you reload it for cybersecurity reasons. There's a lot more to just sending it in and getting it back and putting it back in use. Sometimes there's a lot more work that is done on your end, so that needs to be documented. Performance testing before you put it out. Close the work order. Return it to the customer or wherever it came from. And maybe it's offsite and there's some travel time in there or something like that. So all that is time that sometimes people miss those little things. They're just like, well, I got it. I looked at it and ordered parts and replaced the parts and done, you know. Yeah.
Dave, it says work orders just for information. This is all done on a computer, right? These guys are everything on paper.
Not anymore.
Okay.
Yeah. Not like when I was in the Army.
Well,
Not so bad.
maybe. I still talk to guys, it's like they have a little notebook and they just jot down what they do and then enter it into the system.
We can still order NCR,
Back of a
yellow, orange.
bar napkin.
That's one of my, I'll get to that later, the writing it down on a piece of paper. And I don't have a problem with writing stuff down on a piece of paper, but I have some other stuff that I kind of, that bugs me about that.
Yeah.
So these are all tasks that are every one of these equals some kind of time, is my point of this slide. So work orders, what goes in repairs? Work order, wording for repairs on work orders or comments is the section in the CMMS. What should be included? Maybe performance tested, function tested, meet performance specs, no further action needed, that it's ready to go, ready to use, return to service. Some people, you know, and I'm not saying you need to put all these in there, but this is just some other ideas. Unable to duplicate, no problem found. Yeah, that's all stuff.
Well,
That should be somewhere in your work order. And when
I
it's
don't know.
completed.
I don't know of any CMMS today that doesn't have the ability to develop drop downs, and I highly recommend that that's what you do if you want any kind of consistency in your documentation.
And you have some slides on the
I do,
national
yeah.
standardization stuff for that too. So we're covering a lot in our 1 hour here. You guys are getting your money's worth. Work orders, so PM work orders. Wording for PM work orders. Completed PM procedure to ensure normal system operation. Installed parts or PM kit is required, or maybe, you know, hourly kit or whatever it is. The system is functioning normally, no further action is needed or required. Operational check, function passed, functional check passed, ready to use, return to service. Some of the same stuff as the repair part, but this is for PMs. And I just put some of this in here because I think that every work order should have something like that in it. Maybe not those exact words, but something that when it's completed, that's what's one of the steps that you have in there. That in case like the dental hygienist getting called into court, say, like I went through all the steps and it was done, it was completed and it was ready to use on a patient whenever I was done working on it. And as far as it was ready to go. This is quite a while back, I was doing PMs on a defib, and it was a Hewlett Packard defib, if people remember Hewlett Packard. Old, before the yellow one even. I'm not that old, Ro. Someone told me this story, maybe that's it. But I had done a PM on it, and it was a defib used in the open heart room. In the open heart room, they used the lollipop internal paddles. I checked it with the regular paddles. So I plugged in my paddles. I had it and checked it on my defib tested. Everything looked great. They went to use it the next day in an open heart procedure with the internal paddles. It charged up and it wouldn't discharge. It ended up being where they plugged it in at, the pin had pushed back inside. They didn't line it up and they just jammed it in there. And if you look at the newer yellow ones, they kind of have like a funnel shape, like where you can't plug it in wrong. This one is just square. And it actually pushed the pin back that was the discharge button. And they charged it up and it never discharged. So they had another defib luckily and key for the patient. But yeah, it was, and when I checked it, it was working great. No problems with it. Yeah, that's kind of a rarity that you have something like that happen, but it does happen. So work orders, no problem found. There you go. Operational check, function check, review service history. Who reviews service history whenever you have? I like that. Whenever you have something, especially if it's no problem found, for sure. I mean, is this something that's happening all the time? Is there some training that maybe needs to be done? Or is there something else going on here that we maybe don't know about? We keep getting this same piece of equipment with the same problems. And it seems like it's never the equipment, it's always something else that we can't duplicate. Maybe it's the user, maybe it's an intermittent problem.
Or so another technician that looked at it 2 days earlier, and you hadn't talked to
and you don't even know that they
him.
looked at it.
You find out.
Right, right. So unable to duplicate or describe problem or failure, possible intermittent, possible operator use, return to service, ready to use, no further action needed, required. That's just kind of my standard wording on a lot of the stuff that I said, like it should contain this somewhere in the work order. Work orders for abuse or preventable harm. I used to work with a guy that was our director. He was actually the director of facilities. And he said, I don't want to call it abuse alarms. That sounds like they're taking it and like spiking it on the floor and they're trying to break it or whatever. So he called it preventable harm. And I thought that's a pretty good PC term, so that's something that I like to use in my presentations, but I guess it's somewhat preventable sometimes. I mean, you'd rather, like I have this one floor that I work with, they're the surgical trauma ICU, and they have a tendency of dropping their monitors off the gurney and they fall on the floor and the screen gets smashed and it ends up being like, I think the hospital I work at now, in the first year I had one monitor that happened to 6 times. And they said, Dave, we're sorry. Listen, and it's like, well, your main concern is the patient. Is the patient okay? Did the patient fall on the floor? No, the patient, everything's good. Well, if the monitor fell on the floor, I know like there's some things you can't always help. Your number one concern is that patient. And I look at it as, well, that's why I have a job. It's kind of job security. I don't need that much job security 6 times in a year, but it's something that happens. So and I would count that as an abuse or preventable harm repair because it was preventable if maybe they were watching closer or had it hung on there better and it wasn't just sitting on the end of that gurney or whatever. These patients go back and forth to surgery. Sometimes they're brought in from the ED as trauma patients in that floor. So operational functional check, same as the other ones. Failures due to physical harm, abuse, or preventable harm. Return to manufacturer for repair, maybe. Again, time associated with that. Return to third-party service company. Replace broken parts and pieces yourself, ordering parts, so on. That's all time that's documented towards this repair. That's an abuse, preventable harm repair. Maybe the configuration, if it's sent in and comes back, Drug library is an example of that, calibration. Maybe it has to be sit in a certain setting. Maybe you have, if it's a scale, maybe you have all your scale set in kilograms only and you can't toggle back and forth between pounds, whatever it might be. Performance or operational tested, no further action needed or required. Return to service. Outside service documentation. These are a pain in the butt, huh? But, and I'll get to this in just a second, but attach any documentation given by the outside service vendor. So whatever they did, you want to attach that documentation to the database so you have a record of what they did. This includes manufacturer repair, so if it's sent into the OEM for repair. Third-party service documentation, same thing. This is in addition to any work that you did on the work order, such as initial checkout for checking, picking it up from the department, checking it out, calling for an RMA, sometimes that takes a while, or emailing for an RMA, labeling, packing, and shipping. I have a few boxes that I saved. I have a Zoll defib box, and I have a GE monitor box, and I think I have a Camino intracranial pressure box that we have a contract with them, and we send in that ICP for PM. So I have those boxes saved on my top shelf of my bench. Other boxes I don't have. So sometimes it's a pain in the butt to find boxes just to box up something and all the shipping stuff, all the bubble wrap and all that, and it ends up being more time than what I think it should be sometimes for just packing something up and shipping it. And then when it comes back, you check it out on return, make sure everything's working correctly, configured right, all that kind of stuff before it's taken up. And I said, see previous notes for repair work orders. Work orders timing. Close/complete work orders as soon as possible. So this is something that's, I can't even tell you how much of a pet peeve it is to me. When Al was talking about someone writing down something on a piece of paper, I think my blood pressure went up about 5 or 10 points. I've worked with people before that they have their entire month written down on like scribbles on a piece of paper, and they go through this whole thing, and then at the end of the month they sit down in front of the CMMS and they're trying to go back and what did I do on that piece of equipment, and they're entering their stuff in for the whole entire month. I have to leave the room. I can't be there. I can't deal with that. I don't even want to know you're doing that, for one, and like just the fact that you're doing that, it just drives me nuts. So I wanted to say something and hear about it, and hopefully you don't have any people that do that, but if you do, hopefully you can get them down to like a week, and then maybe like graduate down to like a couple of days, then maybe then just one day, they're doing that. So I think, as you go, you should be doing this work, not like at the end, how much time did I spend on, I'll put a 0.25 on there, like, I don't know how much time I spent on that. I don't know how much time I was on hold with Phillips or, the tech support issue. I don't even remember how long the tech support thing took me, like how many, I had to reboot the computer, I had to do that, how long did it take, all that take? I have no idea. I have a note here that I did that, I'll just write down 0.5. Call it good. And, like people in management like Al, they're looking at our statistics every week, maybe how many hours we have or how much work we're getting done, how many PMs we've got done, where we are on our bigger goal for the month or for the year, or whatever it might be. And then all of a sudden, boom, all this stuff pops in there. What happened? Like we were doing crappy, then all of a sudden now we're doing good. Like, oh, this one person, they finally entered all their data for the whole month on their little scribble pad. I can't stand that. Try to do CMMS entry daily, or even as you go by the minute. Sometimes I know you're not like with the stuff. People have handheld devices now, so it makes it a lot easier to do it in the field. There's a clock ticking, whether it's evident or not. So how long it takes to repair something. This presentation I was in the morning, there was someone from Trimedics, and he knew like their time to repair, like how many days to repair or something like that. And he said 2.5, which seemed like a lot to me, because especially now I've had one part that's been on order since July on one piece of equipment, and no delivery time known by the manufacturer. So my 2.5 days is blown on that one piece. It ruins the average. This counts towards completed PMs or total repair time. If you wait to close or complete, then it'll be difficult to accurately document what was done or what you did. Kind of that whole memory thing I was talking about. Like, oh, what did I do on that piece? Oh, okay, I completed the PM. What were the outputs? Was there outputs for that thing? What were the numbers? What went along with it? You can't just put completed and like, I guess you can and call it good and move on, but I think that's not really a good way of documenting your work. Management wants work orders to be closed to be accurate, to accurately reflect the department's dashboard, what I was talking about a little bit ago. So that whole scribble pad thing, if you have people that are doing that, or if you do that yourself, please try to work on fixing that because it's not helping anybody. And really in the bigger picture, when you're saying, well, I don't have time to do the data entry, we need more people. We can't get more people because no one did their data entry. Like it's kind of that dog chasing his tail thing, like he never catches his tail. He's just constantly going in a circle. Like, how can't we get more people? I'm super busy, oh, well, you only counted for 3 hours yesterday. Oh, well, I have all that on my notepad. Are you going to put them in as all 0.5? And you're going to add up to like what, 5.5 hours or 6 hours then? Because you did the 0.5 on each one. Maybe you had one that took you longer, like the screw that he was talking about, taking out of a strip screw. I've spent hours on taking out a strip screw before and ended up retapping and like getting it, like I don't even want to get into that. HTM measurement metrics. So PM completion percentage, that everybody knows that that's a big deal. We're talking about KPIs or key performance indicators. That's usually something that everybody has 100%, right? Or 100% managed. Management time management is just how much of time you're doing through the day, like managing your time as a technician through the day. Average repair time is just looking at how long it takes different technicians maybe in similar areas to do the repair. Like you can't compare repair for repair, like what's your average repair time on all repairs? Okay, you have these people that work on pumps, that they kind of do a lot of repetitive stuff. They kind of get pretty good at it. But then you have these people over here that are like the imaging people that no one's seen this problem before ever. And, they're going to talk about calling in like national tech support or something like that, and the machine's down for 3 days, Can you repair, you can compare those, but it's kind of comparing apples to oranges. So when you look at total repair time, maybe you can divide up your total repair time into sections like pumps total repair time is this, average repair time, whatever, and imaging is this, but that's what that's kind of talking about. Total time to repair is how much time in days. That's something, whether you're aware of it or not, management is probably looking at. Cost of repairs, parts and labor, that seems pretty obvious. And then work order analysis, which Al will get into. Did you have something to add, Al?
No, there's a lot of stuff that I want to get through and still leave time for questions. So,
all right, am I running too long? I'll hurry up.
Yeah.
So PM completion percentage, how many PMs you've done in the period they're assigned, cannot locate and use, salvage, storage. Time management, this tells what you're doing throughout the day. Back to that scrap paper thing again. Time to complete repairs, time to complete PMs, time for meetings, professional development, time for whatever else you've done during the day. So if it's not in the database, it didn't happen, pretty much. So management will usually want to know what you accounted for in an 8-hour day. On work orders, PMs, different ways of doing PMs, divide up time, maybe keep track of each one, maybe a time clock, I don't know, different ways of managing your time on PMs.
I'll share quickly on that front. So I had a discussion with my technicians around getting PMs done, right? And especially now you're required to get 100% done. And how does that happen? Time management is the key to getting there. And the way I describe it, if you think about, okay, like this is your month, okay? And if you think about I don't know what it's like in your organization, but in my organization, they would divide their time this way. And all of this first 3 weeks of the month was spent on doing corrective maintenance. And then the last week of the month was spent, hurrying up and getting all my students. Why is that concerning? Number one, I'm very concerned about the quality of those PMs that are getting done. Number two, what if you have like a vendor PM that needs to be done? Now you're going to call them the last week of the month, hey, I need you to get in here.
They can never do that.
Like, good luck, I can't, right?
Yeah.
What if you get sick, right? Now there's no way that I'm gonna meet that 100% completion compliance. And so I said, what if you sliced this way instead of this way? So you start out like, we always issue our PMs 30 days in advance so that you knew what was coming. You could talk to your customers to see, are there any slow times for you that I could get in here and take care of this stuff? You'd know in advance if there were vendor PMs, you could reach out to them and get those things scheduled. Are there any PM kits that I need so that I can make sure that I have those well in advance?
Batteries,
get them shipped in next day, right? So you're doing that pre-planning, but you also are looking at your month. Okay, so let's say for the sake of easy math, I have 60 PMs that I need to get done this month. Okay, and I look at my calendar and I know I'm going to be in the office 20 days out of the month, this coming month. What does that mean? Hey, you get 3 PMs done a day. Who can't get 3 PMs done a day, right? So it's just a different way of thinking and managing your time better so that you can hit those completions. And we nailed it every single month, just using the Orderology.
Since I mentioned vendor PMs, these are one of my pet peeves that it takes a lot of time to set up some of those vendor PMs. Calling them, getting a PO, you get a quote from them, you get a PO, then they come in, then you have to meet them because they don't know where they're going, walk them up there, then you're chasing them to get the paperwork. Those are like, sometimes we go, why don't we just do this ourselves? But that takes a lot of time, some of those vendor PMs. This time management thing is where a lot of techs seem to get in trouble. So I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention, and keep track of what you're doing each day. That's that seems really easy to say that, but in practice, much harder to do, it seems like, for a lot of techs. This can help factor into adding staffing, look closer at time-consuming tasks, and maybe ways to reduce that time for solutions. Average repair time in quarter hours gives management an idea of how long is being spent on repairs. I usually do 0.25 as kind of my minimum, but sometimes I have stuff that's 0.1 or 0.05, or if I'm ordering the same PM parts for a bunch of different things, I'll do like 0.1 on each one or 0.05 on each one. So sometimes I'm used to compare like technicians to each other. Total time to repair is how long in days to repair. This is kind of like maybe tedious stuff, but I want to give you all time to get the part done. So all this adds up to what's called a cost of service ratio. Cost of service ratio is the purchase cost of inventory. Then factors are shop hourly labor rate. Does everyone know how much your shop hourly labor rate is? If you work in management, you probably should know that, what it costs, with your people, benefits, the X, whatever, all that stuff that Al's probably more of an expert than me about talking about. Cost of vendors, repairs, cost of services, cost of service contracts, operational costs, such as even something as printer supply. All this adds up to cost of service ratio and can be measured in a percentage. Cost of repairs can help identify equipment with high repair costs and look at different ways of doing things, and maybe get rid of some of those lemons that are in, like ones that seem like they break more often. Cost of repairs, cost of service ratio. This is what I was talking about on the last slide. Your purchase cost over your annual cost of maintenance and divided by your original cost of the asset equals a percentage. And that's a lot of
just as a point of reference, and then I've used this often for justifying moving service in-house. Cost of service ratio on service contract is typically between 10 to 15%. And every vendor that I'm aware of uses the acquisition cost as a way of pricing your contract. So it's like said, it's between 10 and 15% of the acquisition cost. Compare that to, you know, what's generally accepted in the industry. If you're doing a really good job, you're at around 5% cost of service ratio. So you're cutting your cost in half. And most of our benchmark for bringing service in-house is, I knew I could do that service as good or better for 60% of the cost, right? Give me the people, give me the training, give me the tools that I need, and I can deliver on that. So your first year might be a little bit more, right? Because you have to account for that. But then every year subsequent to that, you can do better.
Independent service organizations who have been trained by manufacturers for a lot less than that.
Yeah.
Like me.
And that's where a lot of ISOs, like where they kind of get their foot in the door, it's like saying, hey, we can beat your biomed department in doing, you know, this more cost effectively than what they are, like an in-house program. So, AEM analysis, I'm not even going to go into this because there's like entire day classes on this, but basically it's looking at, if you have no problems when you're doing PMs, can you change the process? Can you move maybe the schedule out further? Or maybe you can skip checking the fuse every time you do this PM on the CSU. You don't need to check fuse F1 because you've never found fuse F1 bad. When you've done, if you check the equipment and it's working, that fuse is probably good. You don't need that in your PM procedure. So you can eliminate steps too. So and then AEM analysis, if work orders are coded correctly, it helps to add up to this AEM. And then AEM can save everyone time in your department, and everyone will be really happy that you did that. So I'm going to pass it over to Al. Sorry I took too long.
That's all right, Dave. Okay, so we go back to the why, and I covered some of this already. Staffing, justifying staffing, I'll go into the actual document that I used for that. The capital planning that I talked about, benchmarking, improve and more efficient operations. Dave talked about AEM, and I still can't believe how many customers I have having implemented an AEM program. Why? And almost always the response I get is, I don't feel confident that we have the data to defend what it is that we're doing, to deviate from the recommendation. So it's easier just to do that kind of recommendation. Well, I guarantee you, there isn't anybody in this room that has an abundance of staff that can afford to do that. So if you have an opportunity to take workload off of your technician by implementing an AAM program, well, you should do that, right? I know when I did it, the first round equated to 3 FTEs in same time. 3 FTEs. Now, again, it was a large organization, 50 hospital system, but that's not insignificant, right? And, you know, what CMS demands is that you don't reduce safety, and we did. And by the way, it's like 2010, before anybody even talked about AEM. More balanced PM and CM workload. I've shared with you a KPI document that I present my one-ups, and this is something that we got very aggressive about. It goes back to what I talked about before. So you've got somebody that learned that if you do these additional steps during the PIA, you can reduce the number of CIA. And that's a key thing that could have significant impact. And then more device hours versus non-device hours. So what does that mean? We categorized our work into these 2 categories. Device hours, which included PM, CM, inspections, investigations, hazard alerts, recalls. Anything related to supporting a piece of equipment, okay? Or, you know, I always talk about it, either fixing the customer, fixing the equipment, or fixing the customer, okay? And then non-device hours, things like department meetings, compliance training, vendor training, administrative work, and travel. And when we first started this initiative, we were at 1,001 annual device hours per technician. That, by the way, is the average for our industry. Think about that for a minute. Less than half of the time that you're paying your people to spend doing what you actually hired them to do. That it's like that can't be. We have to figure out a better way to do it. How did we change it? So we started, because we documented the non-device hours, just like we documented the device hours. Things like department meetings, things like compliance training, vendor training, administrative work. It gave us the ability to scrutinize how that time is being spent and try to figure out better ways to do it. So for example, department meetings. All the meetings that we have, do we need all of those meetings? And if we do need those meetings, do we need the full time that we've allotted for it? They're saying that any task will expand to meet the time allowed for it. Right? So if we shorten up the time and are very focused on what we covered during that meeting, do we need the full hour? Oftentimes, no, right? And so by scrutinizing that time and making those kinds of choices to reduce the non-device hours and increase the device hours, I'll show you the results of that. Administrative work. Are there things that your technicians are doing that you can get somebody else to do? Everybody understands today how hard it is to find qualified technical staff. I'm listening to Dave's story and I'm thinking, why is somebody with Dave's knowledge and experience spending time packing up a box to ship something up to a vendor? That's crazy, right? His time needs to be spent doing more important things. So is there somebody else? Do you have students? Do you have biomed assistants that you can have do some of that work? It's just, you start thinking about what your technicians are doing every single day and asking the question, do they need to be doing that, right? I did a time motion study on parts. And for a month, like I had 80 technicians, okay? And over the course of a month, I had to document every minute that they spent doing everything related to the parts process. So identifying, ordering parts, following up, following up on part orders, doing repairs, changes, all of that. And on average, is an hour per technician per day. An hour per technician per day. Like I said, I had 80 technicians. That's 80 hours a freaking day on the parts process. I had an open tech position. I didn't hire a tech. I hired a parts procurement specialist. And I created a process that would route all of those parts requests to that person. And they own that process. And they did all of it. And again, it made every single one of my technicians more productive as a result.
I recently closed our next work orders so that they weren't at the computer doing that. We got everything done daily, and she's checking accuracy.
And what
They forgot to pay.
there's so many opportunities like that. But having the ability, that there's a saying, you can't improve what you can't measure, right? If you've got documentation that shows you where the time is being spent, I often equate it to your personal budget at home. What's your first step? Without any judgment whatsoever, document where you're spending your money, right? Step one. Then step two is review that and decide, is this how I want to spend my money, right? And that's how you create your budget with the must-haves and everything else. But the first step is documenting, right, what you're doing. Okay. This is the trend. So I go back to the year one of this, or 1,001 annual device hours and 860 non-device hours. And the delta between those two added up in 2080 is PTO, right?
Can you go to that last slide when we try to tell? On the non-device hours, we're not saying that those activities have no value.
No.
So you're trying to parse out non-value activities with value. So if you did that, what would those average tech conversations be? So if you took those things that are non-device hours, that are mission critical,
yeah,
and put those into the device hours, or create three categories, it says device hours, essential performance hours, and non-value activity hours, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm not sure. In my mind, the stuff on the right, I don't consider those non-steps, right? You have to do those things. But again, by documenting them, you now can make some decisions about, is it critical? I assume that it was critical. Is it critical? And if it isn't, rather than document it, I'm just going to stop doing it. right? I'm sure you're familiar with the 4 quadrants, right? And there's that quadrant that's not important, not urgent. You just shouldn't be doing those things. So again, all those things on the right are important. But I'll even talk about travel. Okay, so the way that our business was set up, we had a lot of field engineers that traveled, throughout a region to repair equipment. Like I said, we did all those modalities in house. So we had guys that were dedicated to doing MRIs, we had guys dedicated to doing CTs, guys dedicated to doing ultrasounds, and they traveled, right? And again, the data told us that if you exceeded a certain number of travel hours or travel miles, we were better off getting a lease vehicle and giving it to that person rather than reimbursing them on money. Not all technicians were happy with that because they were making money hand over fist on the mileage reimbursement. But we made that determination, and if we were good stewards of the organization's money, we should be doing stuff like that, right? So after time, I came across this device you could put in the vehicles where you could actually track movement. Okay, you can imagine how popular that was. But here's the thing. I was very disappointed in the reaction, and the reaction only came from like 2 people, right? That were like, "Oh, big brother," and it's like, under my watch, when have I ever used these kinds of things in a punitive way? It brings additional data for us. Are you guys familiar with like UPS and FedEx that they have right turn only policy? Why? Because they save a lot of time by planning out routes where they only do right turns. Okay? So that's the kind of thing, I want that data. I want to see how we can gain efficiency, right? So again, where we started was 1,001 device hours, 869 device hours every year, being that aggressive about going after those things. When I left, so this chart ends in 2009 at 1399. I left Aurora in 2011, and we were at 1,550 device hours per technician. Imagine how much more work you can get done with 1,550 versus 1,000. And here's the other thing. I'll go back to this slide. Of the stuff that's on here, what are the things that technicians love to do? What are the things that technicians hate to do? So by increasing these and decreasing those, we also increase employee engagement at the same time. How about it? Data integrity, as we talked about, this is critical, and I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I had an 80-page data integrity policy that covered every single field in the database, what data needs to go in there, how it's represented, what data format. You don't have to take a picture of this. Anyone who asks me, I will send them a copy of that data integrity policy, okay? Happy to do that. But here's the thing I want to call out. Well, first of all, the first page of the policy was an acknowledgement statement that every technician had to sign and acknowledge that they received and understood the policy. And then this line right here, failure to comply with these processes will result in progressive disciplinary action up to and including termination. So it's a message that we take this seriously. We have to have this, okay? I can't afford for somebody's refusal to do the documentation in the right manner to put our entire program at risk. I can't have it. It's a condition of employment. So this is a part of the data integrity policy that Dave called this out, timeliness on work order completion. And so in this policy, we had this thing in there that you had to complete the work orders within 24 hours of having the work completed. That changed because we changed how we did business. And we worked with our internal web development team to provide access to information in the database about the status of the equipment. Okay, because we did so much imaging equipment, and that's critical information for those radiology leaders, okay? All of a sudden, 24 hours doesn't cut it anymore. That documentation needs to be real time. And in this day and age, with the technology that's available, why isn't that possible? I mean, my guys all had Blackberries at the time, but as a smart device for making performance. Most technicians in the biomed space have a laptop. Why can't they close the work orders right when they get the work done? Jotting stuff down for a month, and I have to explode when I hear stuff like that.
Me too.
And again, I mean, there's very, very detailed information here that includes, the functions, what the process is that needs to be followed, and then comments related to it. There was a group of us that got together at Amy in 2019. When I thought about what I did in my past to be successful and to change all of this, I thought, why couldn't we do this as an industry? Okay, so in that meeting, it was all of the major CMMS companies were represented. And we talked about getting together, coming up with a standard. Okay, there's a white paper available if you go on Amy's website. There's one on the failure codes. There's one that will be published by the end of this year on work order types. I won't go into detail on this, but we worked collaboratively to come up with a recommended list of codes. And when we do a new customer implementation, rather than going to them and say, what do you want me to put in here?
That pull down that you were talking about earlier.
Right, it's like, here's what we recommend based on the team standards, but do you have any reason that you want to move away from, right? But I mean, it's steering people toward the standard. And I think that will help us as an industry get to the point where we can actually benchmark. As I said, the next thing that we worked on, we started with fault codes because we thought that was an important thing relative to supporting your AEM program, to start there and create that standard. And then our second initiative was on work order types. And I think the next one will be result codes, but and we're just going to continue to work through these until we have all of them covered. And so, like I said, this next white paper should be available by the end of the year. So this is just a table that I had of manning data. So for every single device category, you can see how many, I had a list of how many of those were in my inventory, how many hours per device, and then just the math, to determine what my staffing should be. Going back to the standardized code, this is what I did, the standardized code. So I had over 150 codes in my system. What that created for me is I could have 20 different technicians doing the exact same work and coding it 20 different ways. How am I ever going to measure anything or benchmark anything? So we pared that list down to a bare minimum codes, but had very clear definitions and trained our technicians on, this is when you use this code, okay?
That last slide that you had, Al, to me, that's one of the most important ones, because when you add new equipment, you're looking at this, how long it's taken before, and then you're figuring out when we add new equipment, we need to add FTEs.
Right.
And if they haven't been documenting, then you don't get enough FTEs to do the work.
Right, and I'll show you that. So we did the same thing for result codes, and you can see for every request code, there was a finite set of acceptable result codes with definition. For every request code, there was a finite set of fault codes with clear definitions. So, I mean, we did a lot of work here, and then trained all of our technicians on how to use each of those codes. So this is the important document that I wanted to walk through that I used for staffing. So at budget time every year, I went to finance with this one pager. Okay, you can see it in very large font there.
In green too.
Green's
Green's good,
so
right?
you have, first of all, you have to have productivity
methodology that your organization has sanctioned and demonstrate that you're at maximum productivity. Because if you don't do that, you're never going to be able to add staff. Then no one's going to give you people, okay? So that was the first thing to establish. Okay, so then what we did was we had, our business was broke out into different modalities, and for each of our regions, we had how many devices were added and the number of hours per year in device hours to support those devices. Now, this, I want to make sure you understand, these are net adds. Okay, so the first thing that we did is we subtracted all of the count and the device hours from our baseline inventory, and then added back in all of those things that were added. Okay, and you see this particular year, 7.22% inventory growth, which is low for what we added, because like I said, it's 10%. So again, we had that information laid out all the way across for every region, the total number of devices and associated device hours. And then when you get to the end, we had a total. Then you drop down here, and at the time that we did this one, we were at 1,230 annual device hours per technician. If you take the number of device hours that were added and divide it by 2080, you're cheating yourself. You have to use the calculation based on the average device hours, annual device hours per technician. And so that becomes your divisor, right? And so this particular year, what that equated to was 5.32 FTEs, okay? I also had information in pocket about, again, I established the productivity, so it means I can't absorb this additional work, okay? So we have two choices. You can either give me the people that I need to service that equipment for this much, or I can outsource it for this much. What would you like me to do? Never, ever got turned down.
Pretty easy decision.
Okay. But again, if you don't have the data, you can't do this stuff. Don't tell me how busy you are, because that doesn't help me. Document your work, do it accurately, do it timely, and then I can do stuff like this. And again, then I went back to technicians and showed them the results of this. They're like, I get it now. I understand. Okay?
That's the part I think that's missing a lot of the time. It's knowing what you do daily, how it adds up to this bigger picture.
Right. And this is just a similar thing that was done by Mike Kaiser at Middlesex, one of our customers in Connecticut. So, you know, he created this thing where he talked about what ideals were and where they were at. Again, you can't improve what you can't measure. Just having the ability to measure things and see where you stood in what your relative to what your targets were. And this just showed, this is the low threshold for maintenance capacity at his organization. The high threshold for maintenance capacity, this is where their actual trend was. And you can see in January of this year, they exceeded their capacity. And that helped him justify the additional staffing and that money. This was the KPI thing that I shared with my one-ups. And a couple things I'm going to call out here. Cost of service ratio, as Dave talked about, we had that. And so here I showed 3 months of data and then the year-end totals. And that particular year, we were at 4.02%. But I was talking about the two most important metrics that you can track: cost of service ratio, customer satisfaction. I look at it as a 10 commandments, right? The two most important commandments are love God above all else, love your neighbor as yourself. You do those two things, everything else takes care of itself. Relative to our work, if you focus on cost of service ratio and work your tail off to reduce that as much as possible and maximize customer satisfaction, if you nail those two things, everything else takes care of itself. Okay. And then one other thing I wanted to call out, I talked about right up here at the top, we wanted to create a better balance of planned maintenance versus corrective maintenance. So we got very, very aggressive and empowered our technicians to figure out how things are failing, figure out whether or not there are additional things that we can add to the PM procedure to help reduce those corrective maintenance reports. And this 1 year, by investing an additional 135 hours of PM time, we were able to reduce our corrective maintenance hours to 1,500. I think that was a pretty good investment. But again, without data, you're dead in the water. Instead, you're gonna have treasure.
Data treasure.
Data treasure, yeah.